She didn't even hesitate. My own daughter looked straight at me, took my grandmother's necklace in her fingers like it was something sticky, walked to the window, and threw it into the dark garden. "It's garbage, Mom. You should have let it go years ago." "Hey, it's Grace. Glad you're here. And I'll say this right away. No one touches something like that and calls it garbage unless they've already decided you don't matter. That's where this really starts." I didn't move at first. I remember the exact sound the window made, the soft, dry click as it opened, the faint night air slipping in, carrying that cold, damp smell of soil and rosemary. Then the barely audible rustle as the necklace disappeared into the darkness outside, swallowed somewhere between the old hydrangeas and the cracked terracotta pots I hadn't replaced since autumn. "Celeste," I said, very quietly. Not because I was calm, because if I raised my voice, I knew something inside me would snap in a way I couldn't control. She turned back like nothing had happened, brushing her hands together as if she'd just shaken off dust. "What?" she asked, already annoyed, already bored. Troy stood near the kitchen island, holding a glass of that expensive Chianti he'd brought, like it was some kind of offering. He didn't say a word, just watched me the way people watch storms from behind glass. Curious, but not involved. "That necklace," I said. "You just threw it outside." "Yes," she replied, "because you keep clinging to things that make you look old." She glanced around the kitchen then, her eyes doing that slow, measuring sweep she'd been doing all evening. "This house, these objects, it's all the same. You're living in a museum, Mom. It's not healthy." There it was again. Not concern, not care, just that polished, rehearsed tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while cutting something apart. I looked down at the empty space in my hand. I hadn't even realized when she'd taken it. One moment, I was holding the chain between my fingers, feeling the familiar weight of the garnets. Deep, dark red, almost like dried wine. And the next it was gone. "My grandmother wore that during the winter of '42, I said. "She hid it in a flour tin when they couldn't afford coal. She used to tell me it was the only thing that made her feel like she still owned something in this world." Celeste sighed. Actually sighed. "Mom, that's exactly what I mean. You're attaching all this mythology to a piece of metal and stones. It's not reality." "It's not reality," I repeated, tasting the words. Troy shifted slightly, like he might step in, but then he just took another sip instead. The glass clicked faintly against his teeth. That small, careless sound irritated me more than anything she'd said. "You didn't even ask," I said. "Ask what?" Celeste snapped. "Permission to throw away something that's clearly dragging you backward? I'm trying to help you, Mom. You just refuse to see it." Help. I let that word sit there between us for a moment. All evening, she'd been helping. Helping me notice the wallpaper was outdated. Helping me understand that my silver tea set looked tired. Helping me realize that no one my age should be living alone in a house this impractical. She'd walked through every room like a surveyor, her fingers brushing over surfaces, her eyes pausing on corners, on shelves, on anything that might translate into value if converted into numbers. And I had let her, because she was my daughter. Because I kept thinking there was still something underneath that tone, that posture, that careful distance she wore like a tailored coat. "I'll get it," I said finally. Celeste rolled her eyes. "Seriously?" "It's dark. It's probably in the mud, and honestly, it's not worth the trouble." "It is to me." "That's the problem," she said, sharper now. "Everything is to you. You don't think about what's practical anymore. You don't think about the future. You don't think about what happens when— She stopped herself, but not fast enough. When what? I asked. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, when you can't manage things on your own. There it was. Clean. Clear. Finally said out loud. I nodded once, slowly, as if I was considering her words, as if I hadn't just felt something cold and precise settle into place inside my chest. I'll be outside, I said. Marion, don't be ridiculous, she snapped, but I was already moving. I grabbed my old coat from the back of the chair, the heavy one with the worn cuffs, and slipped my feet into the rubber-soled shoes I used for the garden. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Behind me, I heard Troy murmur something low, probably trying to calm her. Celeste's voice came back sharper, irritated, controlled but cracking at the edges. She's proving my point, she said. I didn't answer. The back door opened with a familiar creak, and the cold hit me immediately, wrapping around my face, slipping under the collar of my coat. The garden was almost completely dark. Just a faint wash of light from the kitchen window stretching across the grass like a pale stain. Somewhere out there, in the wet soil, among broken stems and old clay, was the last thing my grandmother ever placed in my hands. I stepped down onto the stone path, feeling the dampness through the thin soles, and closed the door behind me. And that was the moment I understood something, with absolute clarity. This wasn't about a necklace anymore. The grass was colder than I expected. It pressed through the thin soles of my shoes, damp and stubborn, like the earth itself didn't want to give anything back. I stood still for a second, letting my eyes adjust, breathing in that heavy metallic smell of wet soil, crushed leaves, and something faintly sweet. Maybe the last of the lavender I hadn't trimmed before winter. Somewhere out here. I stepped forward slowly, scanning the ground where the light from the kitchen window faded into darkness. The hydrangea bushes cast crooked shadows, their bare branches clawing at the air. The old bird bath leaned slightly to one side, cracked down the middle since last spring. Everything looked familiar, but different now. Hostile, almost. Just find it, I muttered to myself. I crouched near the stone path first, brushing my hand over the damp gravel. Nothing. Just small, cold pebbles pressing into my palm. I moved toward the rosemary hedge, pushing aside brittle stems, feeling them snap lightly under my fingers. Still nothing. Behind me, through the window, I could see movement. Celeste pacing. Troy standing still, his silhouette stiff, uncertain. Neither of them came out. Of course they didn't. I moved deeper into the garden, toward the darker patch near the old terracotta planters. One of them had broken months ago. I never threw it out. It lay on its side now, half buried in dirt. I knelt beside it and reached into the soil, fingers sinking into something cold and soft. Mud. I swallowed the irritation rising in my throat and kept going, sweeping my hand slowly across the ground. A sharp edge caught my skin. I flinched, pulling back instinctively. A thin line of blood appeared across my palm. Of course, I whispered. I wiped it on my coat without thinking and leaned closer, using my other hand to feel around the broken shard. Nothing but roots and damp earth. 3 minutes passed, then 10, then more. Time started to stretch in that strange way it does when you're focused on one single thing and everything else disappears. My knees began to ache from the pressure against the ground. My fingers went numb, then stung as the cold crept in deeper. Still nothing. I stood up slowly, my back protesting, and looked around again. I tried to replay the angle, the way she had thrown it, the height of the window, the direction. Left, slightly left. I turned and walked toward the winter jasmine bush near the fence. It hadn't bloomed properly this year, just a few weak yellow flowers clinging to thin, tangled branches. I pushed into it carefully, ignoring the way the stems scratched against my sleeves. "Come on," I murmured, more to myself than anything else. I bent lower, sweeping my hand through the base of the bush. Leaves, twigs, damp soil, and then something caught. Not sharp this time. Smooth. I froze. Slowly, carefully, I pushed the branches aside and leaned closer. There, half hidden under a thin layer of mud and tangled in the lower stems, was a faint, dull glint. For a second, I didn't move at all. Then I reached in and pulled it free. The chain slid against my fingers, cold and slick. One of the garnets was smeared with dirt, another slightly loose in its setting. The clasp hung crooked, bent just enough to make my chest tighten. But it was there. I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. "There you are," I said softly. I didn't rush back inside. I stood there for a moment longer, holding it in my palm, feeling its weight. It felt different now. Not lighter, not heavier, just changed. Or maybe that was me. From the window, I saw Celeste stop pacing. She must have seen me straighten up. For a brief moment, our eyes met through the glass. She didn't smile. I closed my hand around the necklace and walked back toward the house, each step slower than the last. By the time I reached the door, my fingers were stiff, my knees aching, and my coat damp at the edges. I opened it quietly and stepped inside. Warm air hit my face, thick and artificial. Celeste was already at the table, sitting down like nothing had happened. Troy stood beside the counter, his glass now empty. "Well?" she asked, without getting up. I didn't answer immediately. I walked to the sink, turned on the tap, and let warm water run over the necklace, watching the mud slide away in thin brown streams. The garnets began to glow again. Deep, quiet, unapologetic. "It was in the jasmine," I said. Celeste shrugged. "Lucky you." I turned off the water and wrapped the necklace in a clean linen napkin, pressing it gently, almost carefully. When I looked up again, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the table, right in front of her, lay a folder. Open. And inside it, papers I had never seen in my house before. I didn't touch the folder right away. I finished drying the necklace first. Slowly, carefully, like it deserved more patience than anything else in that room. The linen napkin absorbed the last of the moisture, and when I unwrapped it again, the garnets had that deep, steady glow I remembered, like embers that never quite go out. Only then did I look at her. Celeste had already leaned back in her chair, one leg crossed over the other, watching me with that same expression. Half impatience, half something sharper. Not quite anger, something colder. "You see," she said, "nothing dramatic. You found it. Life goes on. Life goes on." I nodded once, then finally shifted my gaze to the table. The folder wasn't just open, it was arranged. Neatly, deliberately, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. "What's this?" I asked. "Oh," she said lightly, as if it were nothing. "That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about tonight." Of course it was. I walked over and pulled out the chair across from her, lowering myself into it without breaking eye contact. The wood felt solid under me, familiar, grounding. Troy moved slightly, like he was considering sitting too, then thought better of it and stayed where he was. Always just outside the center of things. I reached forward and turned the top page toward me. Property evaluation request. My address printed clearly at the top. Below it, A company name I didn't recognize. Some real estate group with a polished logo and too many promises condensed into one line of text. I turned the page. Estimated market value. A number sat there. Clean. Detached. Larger than I expected, but not surprising. Houses like mine didn't exist much anymore. Not in this condition. Not on land this size. Who requested this? I asked. Celeste didn't hesitate. I did. I let that sit for a moment. You requested an evaluation of my house, I said. Yes, she replied, already leaning forward slightly now, like we were finally getting to the part she'd been waiting for. Because we need to start thinking ahead, Mom. Realistically. Realistically, I repeated. She nodded. You're living alone in a place that's too big, too expensive to maintain, and honestly, not designed for someone your age anymore. Those stairs alone. I've managed the stairs for 38 years. And you won't manage them forever, she cut in, sharper now. That's the point. Troy cleared his throat softly, but still said nothing. I flipped another page. Senior Living Community Brochure. Glossy. Bright. Smiling older couples walking through perfectly lit gardens that didn't have a single dead branch or cracked pot in sight. Everything symmetrical, controlled, safe. They have excellent facilities, Celeste continued as if reading from something rehearsed. Medical staff, activities, security. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. I'm not worried, I said. You should be. There it was again. Not concern. Instruction. I looked up at her, really looked this time, at the way her fingers rested on the edge of the table, tapping lightly, at the way her eyes kept drifting, not to me, but to the walls, the cabinets, the space around us. Measuring. You've been planning this, I said. She exhaled, like I was finally catching up. I've been thinking about it, yes, because someone has to. Someone has to, I repeated quietly. Yes, because you won't. You just stay here, holding on to things that don't make sense anymore. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the napkin in my hand. Like that necklace. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled the next paper from the folder. A handwritten list. Repairs before listing. Kitchen modernization, bathroom fixtures, exterior paint. Landscaping cleanup. Landscaping cleanup. My jaw tightened slightly at that one. You were going to list the house, I said. It's the logical step, she replied. Sell it while the market's good, move you somewhere appropriate, and then we can manage the funds properly. We. That word landed heavier than anything else. We? I asked. She leaned back again, folding her arms. I would help you handle everything. Of course. You don't need to deal with all the legal and financial details. It's complicated. I've handled my finances just fine so far. That's not the same as optimizing them. Optimizing. I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but there was nothing light in it. When did you arrange this? I asked. A couple of weeks ago, she said, too quickly. Then correcting herself. Well, initially, just to see what we're dealing with. A couple of weeks. I thought about the phone calls I'd ignored. Unknown numbers. Messages left about property interest. I had dismissed them as mistakes. Spam. Something irrelevant. They weren't. You didn't tell me, I said. I was going to, she replied. Tonight. That's why we're here. I looked at the folder again, then at her, then back at the necklace, still resting in the folded linen. No. That wasn't why they were here. You threw it out before you mentioned any of this, I said slowly. She blinked, irritated. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, I said. For the first time that evening, she didn't have an immediate answer. And in that small pause, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. I closed the folder, but didn't push it away. Instead, I aligned the papers neatly, one edge against the other, like I used to do with invoices back when details still mattered to people around me. The small gesture made Celeste shift in her seat. She didn't like silence when she wasn't controlling it. "You're looking at this the wrong way," she said, softer now, adjusting her tone. "This isn't about taking anything from you. It's about protecting you." "From what?" I asked. She hesitated, then gave a short shrug. "From mistakes. From being alone. From things getting out of hand." Out of hand. I let my fingers rest lightly on the folder. "You think my life is out of hand?" "I think you're ignoring reality," she replied. "You're 68, Mom. You're living in a house that needs work, handling everything yourself, refusing help." "I didn't refuse help," I said calmly. "You didn't offer help. You offered control." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," I said quietly. "What's not fair is planning to sell my house without telling me." "I didn't plan to sell it," she snapped. "I planned to discuss it. With a valuation already done, a repair list prepared, a place picked out for me to move into." I tilted my head slightly. "That sounds less like a discussion and more like a decision." Troy finally stepped in, voice low. "Maybe we just got ahead of ourselves." Celeste shot him a look, sharp and immediate. He fell silent again. I watched that exchange carefully. "How long have you been thinking about this?" I asked. She exhaled, slower this time. "A while." "How long?" "A few months." "Months." So this wasn't a reaction. It was a plan. "And in those months," I said, "you never once thought to ask me what I wanted." "I know what you want," she replied quickly. "You want to stay here because it's familiar, because it's comfortable. But that's not always what's best. And you decide what's best." "I understand what needs to be done," she said, leaning forward again. "And I'm trying to make sure you don't end up in a situation where things fall apart and no one is prepared." I held her gaze. "You mean a situation where I don't sign something you expect me to?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second. Then she recovered. "That's not what I said." "No," I said, "but it's what you meant." The room felt smaller now, tighter. Even the air seemed thicker, like it was pressing inward. I picked up the brochure again, looking at the smiling faces printed on it. Perfect lighting. Perfect lives. "Did you already speak to them?" I asked. Celeste hesitated again. "I made an inquiry." "Of course you did." "It's just information," she insisted. "That's all." I set the brochure down. "And the appraisal?" I continued. "Did you invite someone here?" "No," she said quickly. "Not yet." "Not yet." I nodded slowly. Everything was almost in place. Just one step missing. My step. I folded the napkin around the necklace a little tighter and placed it beside the folder. "You've done a lot of work," I said. Finally, she relaxed, just slightly, like she thought she was getting through to me. "I have," she said, "because someone has to think ahead." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, very evenly, "Then let me ask you something, Celeste." She leaned in, ready. "When exactly did you decide that my life needed your permission to continue?" Celeste didn't answer my question right away. For the first time that evening, she actually looked unsettled. Not because she didn't understand what I meant, but because she realized I wasn't reacting the way she expected. "I'm not asking for permission," she said finally, her voice tighter now. I'm stepping in before something goes wrong. What exactly do you think is going to go wrong? I asked. She let out a short breath, like she'd been holding it in. You're alone, Mom. You forget things. You ignore problems. The house is aging. You're aging. This is just reality. I tilted my head slightly. I forget things? Yes, she said quickly, seizing it. Last month, you didn't answer your phone for 2 days. You missed that appointment with the electrician. I canceled that appointment, I said calmly. Because I fixed the issue myself. She paused, just a fraction. And the phone? She pushed. I was reading, I replied, and I turned it off. That one irritated her. You see, that's exactly what I mean, she said, her voice rising slightly. You isolate yourself. You make decisions without telling anyone. Without telling you, I corrected. Her lips pressed together. The room shifted again. The balance wasn't where she wanted it anymore. Troy moved closer to the table this time, resting his hand on the back of her chair, like he was trying to ground the situation. Maybe we're just worried, he said carefully. That's all. I looked at him. He held my gaze for a second, then looked away. You're not worried, I said. You're preparing. Celeste's patience snapped a little at that. Yes, I'm preparing. Because someone has to. You're acting like everything will stay the same forever, and it won't. And when it changes, you won't be ready. I've been ready for every change in my life so far, I said. Including raising you. That landed, harder than anything else I'd said. She straightened in her chair, her expression sharpening. This isn't about the past. No, I said quietly. It isn't. I reached for the small notebook I kept on the side of the table, the one I used for recipes, shopping lists, small notes I didn't want to forget. I opened it, flipped to a blank page, and picked up a pen. What are you doing? She asked, frowning. Just a moment, I said. I wrote the date at the top. Then the time. Celeste shifted again, clearly irritated now. Mom, what is this? I want to make sure I understand everything correctly, I said. You said I forget things, so let's be precise. That threw her off balance. I looked up at her. You're suggesting I sell the house, move into a facility you've already researched, allow you to manage the funds. Is that accurate? That's not, she started. I held up the pen slightly. Accurate or not? She hesitated. Then reluctantly, yes, that's the general idea. I wrote it down. You've already requested a property valuation, I continued. Without informing me. I told you I was going to. Without informing me, I repeated. She exhaled sharply. Yes. I wrote that down too. Troy shifted his weight. Marion, this feels a bit quiet, I said, without raising my voice. He went quiet. Celeste leaned forward, her irritation now fully visible. What exactly are you trying to prove? Nothing, I said. I'm just recording. Recording what? Your intentions. That hit. Her expression changed, just slightly, but enough. You're making this into something it's not, she said. Then clarify it, I replied. You mentioned earlier that I'm one fall away from needing help. Do you believe I'm incapable of managing my own affairs? Her eyes flickered again. I think you're at risk, she said carefully. At risk of what? She didn't answer immediately. I'm going to stop you right here for a second. Imagine sitting across from your own child while they quietly build a case that you're no longer capable of living your own life. What would you do? Me? I'd have ended the conversation right there and shown them the door. But Marion, she's doing something much colder. Celeste finally spoke. At risk of making decisions that could hurt you financially, physically. I wrote that down too. Then I closed the notebook gently and placed the pen on top of it. "Good," I said. "Good?" she repeated, confused. "Yes," I said, meeting her eyes. "Now I understand exactly where we stand." And in that moment, I think she realized something she hadn't expected. I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetful. And I wasn't going to make this easy for her anymore. They didn't stay much longer after that. Celeste tried to recover the tone. Softer voice, controlled expressions, a few carefully placed phrases about not wanting conflict. But it was too late. Something had shifted, and she knew it. Troy muttered a polite goodbye that sounded more like relief than anything else. Celeste lingered by the door for a second, like she expected me to stop her, to soften, to say something that would reopen the conversation on her terms. I didn't. "Think about what I said," she told me finally, her voice cool again. "Because ignoring this won't make it go away." I gave a small nod. "I won't ignore it." That seemed to satisfy her, just enough. She left without another word. The door closed. The house went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. Not the kind I was used to. This one felt different. Sharper, like the silence after something breaks. I stood there for a moment, listening to the faint sound of their car pulling away. The engine faded, the headlights disappeared from the edge of the window, and then there was nothing. Just me, the kitchen, and everything they had left behind. I walked back to the table slowly. The folder was still there, open, waiting. I sat down and pulled it closer again, this time without hesitation. Property valuation, repair list, the brochure. But now I looked differently, not as someone being told what to do, as someone being studied. I flipped the pages more carefully this time, scanning every detail. There were notes in the margins, small, precise handwriting. Not mine. Update fixtures for appeal. Declutter, remove personal items. Stage for showing. Stage. I let out a quiet breath. They weren't just planning. They were preparing to erase. I closed the folder and set it aside. Then I reached for the necklace. The linen napkin was still slightly damp. I unfolded it slowly, revealing the garnets again. In the brighter kitchen light, I could see the damage more clearly. One setting slightly bent, the clasp misaligned. Fixable. I ran my thumb gently over the stones, remembering my grandmother's voice, soft, steady, never rushed. She used to say, "Things only lose their value when people stop understanding what they mean." I placed the necklace carefully on the table. Then I stood up and walked to the hallway. At the far end, behind the old coat closet, there was a narrow drawer most people wouldn't even notice. It stuck slightly when opened. You had to pull it at just the right angle. I did. Inside were the things I didn't use often, not because they weren't important, but because they were. Documents, old contracts, a few sealed envelopes, and at the very bottom, a small card. I picked it up. Ansel Price, attorney at law. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year, not since the last time I updated my will. Back then, everything had seemed stable, predictable. I had left things the way most people do, simple, fair, unquestioned. I stood there for a moment, holding the card between my fingers. Then I walked back to the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. 10:42 p.m., not too late. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, older, steady, unchanged. "Price?" "It's Marion Whitlock," I said. There was a brief pause. Then, "Mrs. Whitlock, it's been a while." "Yes," I replied, "it has." Another pause. Not uncomfortable, just attentive. "What can I do for you?" he asked. I looked at the folder on the table, at the notes, At the brochure? At the necklace? Then I said, very clearly, I need to make some changes. His tone shifted immediately, sharper, focused. What kind of changes? The kind that need to be done tonight. Silence. Then, I see. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. That was why I trusted him. Are you safe? He asked. Yes. Are you alone? Yes. Good, he said. Then listen carefully, Marion. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And don't let anyone back into that house without your consent. I glanced at the door. I won't. Do you have your documents accessible? He continued. I do. Then I suggest you gather everything. We'll go through it step by step. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. All right. Before I could hang up, he added one more thing. Marion. What changed? I looked at the necklace again. My daughter, I said quietly, just showed me exactly what she thinks I am. There was a brief silence on the line. Then he said, Understood. Let's begin. I didn't sit down. Something about the way Ansel spoke, direct, precise, kept me moving. I gathered everything he asked for. The folder Celeste had brought, my existing will, the property deed, bank statements, even the small notebook where I had written down her words. I laid them out across the table in a clean line. For the record, Ansel said through the phone, start from the beginning, facts only, no interpretations. So I did. I told him about the dinner, about the necklace, about the window. I repeated Celeste's exact words, the tone she used, the way she didn't hesitate. Then I moved on to the folder, the valuation, the brochure, the notes about staging the house. When I mentioned the phrase, one fall away, he interrupted me. Repeat that, he said. I did. There was a short pause. I could almost hear him writing something down. Good, he said. You did the right thing documenting that. I assumed it mattered, I replied. It does, he said. More than you think. I continued. Every detail, every sentence she used. I didn't rush. I didn't skip anything. When I finished, the house felt even quieter than before. All right, Ansel said finally. Here's what I need you to understand, Marion. This is not just about family disagreement, this is positioning. Positioning, I repeated. Yes. Your daughter is building a narrative, gradually, quietly, one where you are no longer fully capable, and she is the logical person to step in. I looked down at the papers again. It fit too well. The calls I've been getting, I said. Real estate, unknown numbers. Not random, he replied. Preliminary outreach, likely testing response. If you had engaged, they would have escalated. I exhaled slowly. And the documents? I asked. Preparation phase, he said. Valuation, relocation options, potential authority structures. Has she mentioned power of attorney? No, I said. Not directly. Not yet, he replied. But she will. There was no drama in his voice, just certainty. I sat down then, finally, my hands resting on the edge of the table. What do I do? I asked. We move first, he said immediately, before she formalizes anything. I felt something steady settle inside me. Tell me how. First, he said, we review your current will. Who is listed as primary beneficiary? My daughter, I said. Celeste. And secondary? My granddaughter, Livia. Good, he said. We'll adjust that. I didn't respond right away. Not because I didn't understand. Because I did. Second, he continued, we restrict any potential access, financial, legal, or otherwise. That includes revoking any informal permissions she may be relying on. She doesn't have formal access, I said. That doesn't mean she isn't preparing to create it, he replied. I nodded slowly. Third, he said, we document everything that happened tonight. You've started that already. That was the correct instinct. We expand it. I glanced at my notebook. I can do that. I know you can, he said. There was a brief pause. Then his tone shifted slightly, not softer, but more deliberate. Marion, he said, I'm going to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. All right. Do you believe your daughter is acting in your best interest? I didn't hesitate. No. Another pause. Good, he said. Then we proceed accordingly. I looked at the necklace again, resting beside the documents. For the first time that night, I felt something clear. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. What happens next? I asked. I'll come to you in the morning, he said. Early. We'll formalize the changes. I'll bring everything we need. How early? Before she has time to adjust her approach, he replied. Before this becomes something else. I understood. Good, I said. Until then, he continued, do not engage with her. If she calls, don't answer. If she messages, save everything. No responses. I can do that. I know, he said again. I hung up slowly and set the phone down. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel the same anymore. I looked at the table, the papers, the notes, the necklace, and then at the door. For the first time that night, I wasn't reacting. I was ahead. I didn't go to bed. Sleep would have been the easy way out, letting the night blur, letting the edges soften. But I didn't want soft. Not anymore. Instead, I stayed in the kitchen. I made tea I didn't drink. I sat, stood, moved, sat again. Every so often I picked up the necklace, checking the bent clasp like it might fix itself if I looked at it long enough. Around midnight, my phone lit up. Celeste. I didn't touch it. It stopped. Then started again. A call. Then another. Then a message. We need to talk. I turned the phone face down. A minute later, another message came in. You're overreacting. That one almost made me smile. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the notebook again and wrote down the time. The exact wording, the sequence. Call, message, pattern. 5 minutes passed. Then another message. Don't make this difficult, Mom. That one stayed on the screen longer. Not because I was considering replying, but because of how familiar it sounded. Not concern, pressure. I wrote that down too. By the time it reached 1:20 a.m., there were 9 missed calls and 6 messages. The tone had shifted. Less controlled now, shorter, sharper. Pick up the phone. This is serious. You can't just ignore me. We're trying to help you. We. Always we. At 1:34, a new name appeared. Livia. I picked that one up. Grandma? Her voice came through, softer, uncertain. Are you okay? Yes, I said. I'm fine. There was a pause on the line, like she didn't quite believe me, but didn't want to push. I tried calling Mom, she said. She's not answering properly. I imagine she's busy, I replied. Another pause. Then, quieter. Something happened tonight, didn't it? I looked at the necklace. Yes, I said. Livia exhaled slowly. I thought so. You knew? I asked. Not exactly, she said. But she's been talking about you. A lot. Lately. That didn't surprise me. What kind of talking? I asked. Livia hesitated. The kind where she says she's worried, she said carefully. That you're alone too much. That you forget things. That maybe you shouldn't be handling everything yourself anymore. There it was, said out loud, from someone who wasn't trying to disguise it. I see, I said. And, Livia added, then stopped. And what? I asked. I wasn't supposed to say this, she said quietly, but I saw something on her laptop a few days ago, just by accident. I didn't interrupt. It was a document, she continued, with your name on it. Something about authorization, property. I didn't understand all of it, but it didn't look like a draft. It looked almost finished. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the table. Did it have a date? I asked. I think so, she said. Recent. Like, this week. That matched. Too well. Thank you for telling me, I said. I didn't know if I should, she admitted. But something felt off, and tonight, she's acting strange, like she's trying to fix something fast. Because she is, I thought. Listen, I said. You did the right thing. Livia was quiet for a moment, then, Grandma, are you in trouble? I looked around the kitchen. The house, the table, the documents. No, I said calmly. Not anymore. That seemed to ease something in her. Okay, she said softly. We stayed on the line a little longer, not talking much. Just enough to feel that someone was there who wasn't trying to move pieces around me. When I hung up, the silence returned, but it felt different again. Clearer. My phone buzzed once more. Celeste. Another message. If you don't answer, I'm coming over. I looked at the time. 2:07 a.m. Then I wrote it down. And for the first time that night, I felt something very precise settle into place. Let her come. At 2:26 a.m., headlights cut across the kitchen wall. Not subtle, not hesitant. Celeste never did anything halfway. I didn't move right away. I just watched the light slide across the cabinets, across the table, across the folded linen napkin where the necklace rested like something that had already survived worse than this. Then the engine shut off. Silence. A few seconds later, the doorbell. Sharp. Repeated. I stood, smoothed my sleeve without thinking, and walked to the door. When I opened it, Celeste was already mid-breath, ready to speak. Her coat wasn't fully buttoned, her hair slightly out of place, just enough to show she hadn't planned this visit, not fully. Troy stood a step behind her, quiet, as always, watching. Finally, she said, stepping forward without waiting. What is going on? Why are you ignoring me? I didn't step back. You said you'd come, I replied. You're here. That's not the point, she snapped, pushing past me into the hallway. You can't just shut me out like this. We were in the middle of a conversation. No, I said, closing the door behind them. We finished that conversation. She turned sharply. No, we didn't. You just walked away from it. I concluded it, I said. Troy shifted again, uneasy now. He glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me. Maybe we should just sit down. We will, I said. I led them into the kitchen. Everything was exactly where I had left it. The documents, the folder, the notebook. And now, one more thing. Ansel Price was already there. He stood near the table, coat still on, gloves in one hand, as if he had arrived minutes before them. Calm, still, entirely out of place in their expectations. Celeste stopped mid-step. What is this? She asked. Good morning, Ansel said evenly. You must be Ms. Moreland. Her expression tightened. Who are you? Ansel Price, attorney for Mrs. Whitlock. That landed. Hard. Celeste turned to me, disbelief flickering across her face. You called a lawyer in the middle of the night? Yes, I said. For what? She demanded. Ansel stepped slightly forward, placing a thin folder on the table. His folder, not hers. To formalize a series of decisions, he said. Time-sensitive ones. Celeste let out a short, incredulous laugh. This is ridiculous. Mom, what are you doing? I didn't raise my voice. I'm making sure everything is clear, I said. Clear? She repeated. Clear about what? Ansel opened his folder, revealing a stack of neatly prepared documents. Not drafts, not notes, final. Mrs. Whitlock has instructed me to revise her estate structure effective immediately, he said, including removal of certain beneficiaries and restriction of access. The room went still. Troy's hand tightened slightly on the back of the chair. Celeste didn't blink. "What did you just say?" she asked. Ansel didn't repeat himself. He didn't need to. Her eyes snapped to me. "You're not serious." "I am," I said. "This is insane," she shot back. "Because of a misunderstanding? Because of one conversation?" "One?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. Ansel spoke again, precise as ever. "Additionally, we have identified documents prepared without Mrs. Whitlock's authorization that suggest intent to establish control over her property and financial decisions." Celeste's face changed. Not dramatically, but enough. "That's not true," she said immediately. Ansel didn't react. "We will be reviewing those materials formally. If necessary, further steps will be taken." Troy finally spoke, his voice lower now. "Celeste, stay out of this," she snapped without looking at him. "Look at this moment carefully." She didn't expect resistance. She expected compliance. And now that the rules changed, everything about her is shifting. If you were here, what would you do? Me? I'd have locked that door long before this point. But Marion, she waited until it mattered. Celeste stepped closer to the table, her voice tightening with each word. "Mom, you're making a mistake. You don't understand what you're doing." I looked at her, fully. "I understand perfectly," I said. "No, you don't," she insisted. "You're reacting emotionally. You're letting someone else influence you." "No," I said. "I'm responding." "To what?" she demanded. I didn't raise my voice. "To clarity," I said. Ansel slid one of the documents forward. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, "if you're ready." I stepped closer to the table, picked up the pen, and in that exact moment, Celeste finally understood something she hadn't allowed herself to consider. She wasn't in control anymore. The pen felt heavier than it should have, not because of the paper, not because of the ink, because of everything that led to that moment. Celeste moved fast. "Don't," she said sharply, stepping closer. "Mom, just stop for a second." I didn't look at her. Ansel didn't move either, but his presence shifted. Subtle, controlled. Not blocking her, not confronting her, just there. "This doesn't have to happen like this," Celeste continued, her tone changing again. Softer now. Controlled. "We can talk this through. You're upset, I get that. But making legal decisions in the middle of the night? That's not rational." I placed the tip of the pen against the paper. "It is," I said. "No, it's not," she insisted. "You're reacting emotionally. Tomorrow you'll wake up and regret this." I signed the first line. The sound of pen on paper was quiet. Final. Celeste stopped talking, just for a second. Then, "Okay," she said quickly, recovering. "Fine. You want to prove a point? You've proven it. You can stop now." I moved to the next page. "This isn't about proving anything," I said. "Then what is it about?" she snapped. "Structure," Ansel answered calmly. Celeste turned to him, frustration finally breaking through. "You don't get to answer for her." "I don't need to," he replied. "I'm executing her instructions." That made her laugh, but there was nothing light in it. "Instructions? You mean you're helping her make a mistake she doesn't even fully understand?" I signed again. Second document. Troy shifted beside her, visibly uncomfortable now. "Celeste, maybe we should just slow down. I said stay out of it." She cut in again, sharper this time. He didn't argue. Of course he didn't. I moved to the third page. "What exactly do you think this changes?" Celeste asked, her voice dropping lower now. "More controlled? More dangerous?" You think cutting me out solves something? You think it protects you? I paused, not because of her words, but because I wanted the next sentence to land exactly where it needed to. Then I looked at her. It doesn't solve anything, I said. It clarifies everything. Her expression flickered, just slightly. I signed the third document. Ansel collected the pages without rushing, aligning them with precise movements, as if this was just another early morning task. But it wasn't. We all knew it wasn't. Celeste stepped closer to the table now, her voice tightening again. You're overreacting to one moment, one comment. That's all this is. I shook my head once. No, I said. This is about everything that led to that moment. She opened her mouth ready to argue, but stopped, because she didn't have a clean answer. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. She wasn't used to being questioned, only obeyed. What did you expect? I asked quietly. That you could walk into my house, decide what happens to it, decide what happens to me, and I would just agree? I expected you to trust me, she said. I held her gaze. I did, I replied. That hit harder than anything else. Silence followed. Thick, uncomfortable. Then Troy spoke again, quieter this time. Celeste, we didn't handle this right. She didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, because now she understood what he was only starting to realize. This wasn't about fixing the situation anymore. It was already gone. Ansel placed the final document in front of me. This completes the primary changes, he said. One more signature. I nodded. Celeste's voice came out slower now, controlled but strained. If you do this, you're not just changing paperwork. You're making a decision you can't undo. I looked at the page, then at the necklace, then back at her. I know, I said, and I signed. For a moment, no one moved. The sound of the pen settling back onto the table felt louder than it should have. Final, but quiet, like something closing without needing force. Celeste stared at the documents in Ansel's hands as if they might rearrange themselves if she waited long enough. They didn't. This doesn't mean anything yet, she said finally. Not loud, not emotional, just controlled. Paper can be changed, Ansel answered before I could. Not without her consent. Celeste's jaw tightened. There are ways. I'm sure there are, he replied calmly, but not ones that will apply here. That was when something shifted again. Not in the room, in her. The control slipped. Not completely, but enough. You're making a mistake, she said, turning back to me. A serious one. You're letting pride decide something that should be handled logically. I leaned back slightly in my chair. Pride? I repeated. Yes, she said quickly. You're hurt, so you're reacting. That's not the same as thinking clearly. I watched her for a long second. Then I said, Tell me something, Celeste. She didn't respond, but her eyes stayed locked on mine. When you threw that necklace out the window, I continued, what exactly did you think would happen next? She blinked, thrown off. That's not relevant. It is, I said. Silence again. You didn't expect resistance, I went on. You expected me to accept it, to let it go, like everything else. That's not true, she said, but there was no weight behind it. You expected compliance, I said. That word stayed in the air. Troy shifted again, more visibly now. His voice came out low. Celeste, she's not wrong. This time she did turn to him, slowly. What? She said. He hesitated but didn't back down. We came in here with a plan, not a conversation. That's not what this is, she snapped. It is, he said. We just didn't say it out loud. That was the first time he had actually stepped into it, and it cost him. Of course you'd say that now, Celeste replied, her voice colder than before. Now that it's gone wrong. He didn't answer, because he couldn't, because it had gone wrong. I looked at her again. Why didn't you just ask me? I said. That question landed differently. She hesitated, because there was no strategy for it. You wouldn't have agreed, she said finally. No, I said. I wouldn't have. Exactly, she replied, as if that proved something. I shook my head slightly. So instead, you decided to prepare everything in advance, I said, so that when the time came, there wouldn't be much left for me to decide. That's not... She started again, but stopped, because it was. And she knew it. The room felt smaller now, not tense, just finished. There was nothing left to argue that hadn't already been exposed. Was it already arranged? I asked quietly. The next step? She didn't answer. That was answer enough. Troy exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. Celeste, we should go. She didn't move. For a second, I thought she might push further, raise her voice, try to break the moment, but she didn't. Instead, she straightened slightly, smoothing her coat like she was resetting herself. This isn't over, she said. I nodded once. No, I replied. It isn't. Because now it wasn't hidden anymore. Now it was clear. She looked at the table one last time. The documents, the signatures, the space where her place had been. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Troy followed, quieter than ever. I didn't stop them. I didn't say anything else. The door opened, closed, and for the first time since that night began, the house felt like mine again. The house stayed quiet long after they left, not empty, not hollow, just settled. I didn't rush to clean anything. I didn't move the papers, didn't put the chairs back exactly where they had been before. I left everything as it was, like the room needed time to catch up with what had just happened. Ansel remained a while longer. He reviewed the documents once more, placed them back into his folder with the same precise care, and then stood near the door. I'll finalize everything by noon, he said. You'll receive confirmation before the end of the day. I nodded. And Marion, he added, pausing slightly, you handled this correctly. I handled it late, I replied. He considered that for a moment. Late is still better than never, he said. Then he left. The door closed, softer this time. Morning came slowly. The kind of pale, quiet light that doesn't rush into a room, just appears. I made tea again, this time actually drinking it. Sat at the same table, same chair. The necklace lay in front of me. I had cleaned it properly before dawn. Warm water, a soft cloth, that old badger hairbrush. The bent clasp still needed repair, but the stones, those stubborn garnets, held their color like nothing had touched them. I picked it up, turned it slightly in the light. It looked the same, but it wasn't. Neither was I. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed again. A message. From Celeste. No apology, no anger either. Just one line. We need to discuss what happens next. I read it once. Then I placed the phone face down. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to respond. Not immediately, not carefully, not at all. Instead, I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the garden. The jasmine bush still leaned slightly where I had pushed through it. The soil was disturbed. One of the terracotta shards had shifted further into the ground. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Later that week, I took the necklace to a jeweler, a quiet man with steady hands and a loop he wore like a second eye. He examined the clasp, the setting, the stones. Strong piece, he said. Old work. Doesn't break easily. I know, I replied. He nodded, as if that was enough. By the end of the week, everything was finalized. The will, the structure, the protections. Celeste received the official notice from Ansel. Clean, direct, without emotion. She was no longer listed as primary beneficiary. No authority, no control. What she did receive was minimal. A small box, photographs, a handwritten recipe card she never cared about. Nothing she could use. Everything she had ignored. The rest, everything that mattered, was secured. Not out of spite, out of clarity. Livia came by that Sunday. She didn't ask questions right away. Just sat with me at the table, drinking tea, looking at the garden like she understood more than she said. "You look different," she told me at one point. "I am," I said. That was enough for her. When she left, I stood in the hallway for a moment longer than usual. Not because I was waiting, because I wasn't. I went back into the kitchen, picked up the necklace, and fastened it carefully around my neck. The clasp clicked into place. Firm, certain. And for the first time in a long time, nothing in this house felt like it could be taken from me again. I'll say this straight. What happened here wasn't about revenge. It was about timing. Marion didn't raise her voice, didn't chase anyone, didn't beg for respect. She just made one decision at the right moment, and everything changed. If you were in her place, what would you have done? And more importantly, how long would you have waited before doing it? If you made it this far, like the video, subscribe, and write in the comments what your move would have been.